Gost televizije Bosne i Hercegovine večeras je ambasador James Pardew. James Pardew, U.S. Special Representative for Military Stabilizations in the Balkans and now a special advisor to the President and to the Secretary of State for Bosnia and Kosovo. Before this assignment, you were at the Pentagon from the very beginning in charge of Bosnia. We have seen you before on television. Your face is familiar to Bosnians, but still they don't know much about James Pardew, the man. What would be the best way to figure out whom we are dealing with?
You're dealing with someone who grew up in a small town in the middle of the United States in Arkansas. You're dealing with someone who's spent a number of years in the U.S. military, did a full career in the U.S. Army, left the Army in 1994, went to work in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and have been associated with a civil service. I first got involved in Bosnian issues in the Pentagon while I was in the military. Working in the J2, that's the staff element in the Joint Staff that handles intelligence. And so I've been involved in it since 1991, a long time, it's almost from the beginning. So I have a pretty good background in this. I feel pretty strongly about what has happened there and what we've done to try to correct it and keep on working on it.
Maybe at that point it is fair to remember that you said the war in Bosnia was not a fair fight. You stated that on July 16, 1996, when the Equip and Train program was launched. The idea was to bring Bosnian army up to a strength comparable with the Bosnian Serb forces. On the other hand, Americans thought it was the only way to reduce the Iranian influence and have, at least on paper, an exit strategy. Before going to origins of the initiative, would you bring us up to date? It is late December 1999, and where does the program stand now?
The capabilities of the Federation military are vastly better than they were when they started in 1996. I feel comfortable that we've done a lot here. We've provided almost $500 million in equipment and training to the Federation armed forces. We've made lots of progress, some progress in integration, not enough. The force is vastly better trained, much better equipped, and I think if were to break out in the future, the people of Bosnia that suffered it during the war would be much, much better able to defend themselves. So we've created, I think, a professional force. It's a small force, but I think one that's becoming increasingly capable and capable of defending the population.
Ambassador, it may sound harsh, but is it fair to say that still Federation armies, mostly on paper, or would you rather hear that Washington's Equip and Train program, despite all the danger signs, is moving ahead?
The Train and Equip program is moving ahead. We still have some funding available, primarily in the training area. I think most of the equipping has been done, at least for this stage. We intend to continue the training aspect of that, which I've always thought was the most important part, because a capable military force is not just the number of tanks and rifles that you have, but it's your ability to use them, the leadership and all of that. So we will continue with the training program for at least a couple more years. We have the funding available to do that. Did it succeed in everything that we set out to do? Nope. It's not over. And there are certain limits to how far you can go with the military when the political situation is not right. And right now we don't have the political structures in place to fully integrate the forces, and that's something that needs to be done over time.
It is hard to penetrate into your statements because it's so consistent, but still let me be a little bit skeptical. And it is widely spread belief that you've been overcome extraordinary obstacles within and beyond the administration even to get this far, with whom you're fighting in the United States, and on the other hand, who was your main enemy in Bosnia regarding this program. Don't tell me that everyone in the States like that at the beginning, especially people in your previous job, meaning Pentagon?
There's a variety of opinions on this, as there are on virtually everything that has to do with Bosnia and the Balkans. But this is presidential policy, and that means that the government of the United States is behind this. And while some people didn't like it as much as others, the president decided to do this. The Congress provided the resources, and so there weren't any particular obstacles that we couldn't overcome internally. There were a number of people internationally who didn't like it as well, but we were able to overcome that, and I'm not going to name names.
Ambassador, let me remind you, Holbrooke wrote that despite the commitment of the president, the Pentagon continued in every internal policy debate to oppose military assistance to the Federation. While fighting with the White House, the Pentagon didn't kill program, but limited American involvement. And the key day was November 15th, Holbrooke wrote in his book, when the Pentagon's Undersecretary Slocum and General Shaligashvili went to the White House and fought badly to minimize U.S. involvement in whole equip and train program. Can you remind us what happened on that day?
Well, I don't know anything about a meeting in the White House on that day. I know that the United States made a commitment. The president supported that commitment, and an awful lot of U.S. resources, to include those from the Pentagon, were sent to Bosnia to assist with the train and equip program. The Pentagon had a dilemma in that they had in one hand forces that were supposed to be neutral in the implementation of the Dayton Agreement, and on the other hand a U.S. commitment in which the United States was not neutral. That is to say, we were providing military assistance to the Federation, specifically to the Bosniaks inside of Bosnia. So the Pentagon wanted a separation between that program, the train and equip program, which was not neutral, and their forces, which were to implement Dayton even-handedly. So there was a separation there. But remember that $100 million in U.S. military equipment provided by the Pentagon, authorized by the Congress of the United States, was sent to Bosnia specifically for this purpose. Pentagon supported that. They had, they had no choice.
I believe, Ambassador, that it's clear that Pentagon supported at the end, but on the other hand, it is well known that Pentagon wasn't happy with the involvement in, let's say, military stuff. You were one of these people whose idea was equip and train program to have that balance of power at first in Bosnia. You were chosen by the Secretary of State at that time. It was Christopher and Ambassador Holbrooke to run the show. And Holbrooke wrote that you were the best possible person, besides you were one of the authors, as I said. And what was, or let me put this way, what is your best quality to do this job?
Well, I had a military background and I was involved in the Dayton Agreement. So I had a small amount of experience in diplomacy, but I knew the key players and I knew the situation, and then I had a military and defense background. So the combination of my military experience and my defense experience, coupled with being at Dayton and watching the way the agreement was reached and what was inside the agreement, made me right for the job. Holbrooke offered it to me and I took it. I thought it was the right thing to do.
You've seen these pictures in Holbrooke's book. On all of these meetings, you were there. How come you don't remember that fight between Pentagon and the White House?
I didn't say that there weren't some tense moments in a lot of these negotiations on a lot of the issues. I don't know anything about a meeting at the White House. Maybe such a meeting took place, but I wasn't there.
Besides that particular meeting, do you have any idea how how that relationship between Pentagon and the State Department and the White House developed to the certain point that we got that equip and train program at the end? I mean, it wasn't easy at that time. Everyone knew that Pentagon and the State Department, for instance, they have some disputes. How to handle the situation?
Well, I don't want to make too much over legitimate policy and implementation differences. Every government on any given issue will have genuine debate among institutions about how it ought to be resolved. I wouldn't make too much out of that. I mean, it got done. That's the key issue.
At the same time, Europeans were strongly against the whole idea. Just a quick factual question. Germany at the very beginning was the only one who, among European countries, to agree to train Bosnian Federation Army. Is Germany still the only one who is actively involved?
Well, don't forget Turkey. I mean, I consider Turkey to be a European country.
From time to time, Turkey was and still is the most
Turkey was
important
very
ally.
forthcoming in supporting this program. They sponsored the donors conference. They provided an awful lot of training for this, and they continue to do that. They have been involved in contracting.
But Turkey is not in the European Union, unfortunately.
No, but it's in NATO.
So how about others? Let's say France, let's say UK.
The Germans were probably the next most forthcoming. They helped a great deal with the helicopter program. Then it dropped off pretty rapidly, and there was a considerable disagreement over this. But again, we made a commitment, and we did it.
Ambassador, for us who are not into military, it is hard to understand certain things. But at the beginning, it was meant to be two phases, the so-called build up and build down. That was compromise, as I understood reading Holbrook's book, between those who were strongly opposed and those who were pushing to that program. Among them, I believe it was you. Meaning they wanted to a certain extent to send weapons to the weakest, and as a second step, reduce some weapons through arms control. It was understood that 5-2-2 concept would be established among Belgrade, Zagreb, and Sarajevo. Is anybody still talking about this particular implementation? I mean, arms control.
I am. I think there's a lot of discussion these days about reducing arms in Bosnia, and that's a good idea, but it ought to be done in a regional context. You can't go back to a situation that existed from 91 to 95 in which people could come in from outside, Serbia specifically, and provide arms to one side in Bosnia. And so I would support major arms reductions only in a regional context, because I think at the end of the day, you still need a means to defend the population in central Bosnia. Now, there have been some reductions recently. I think a 15% reduction, possibly another 15% reduction is coming. In the case of the Federation, that in fact will probably improve the force, in that it will increase the level of competence of the force that's remaining, because perhaps some people who didn't need to be there any longer will be moved on. The force will become a little younger and more vigorous and more professional. And so the 15% reduction in the case of the Federation, working through MPRI and others, we've tried to guide that in such a way that it will in fact make the force better, not just smaller. Now, there is a serious budgetary issue, and it applies to all the forces in Bosnia. It's true in the Republic of Srpska, it's true in the Federation. Military costs are high, and it is a drain on the budget of for a number of things that need to be done, social programs and so forth. But this is not a debate that's unique to Bosnia. I mean, it's true in the United States. How much money do you spend for defense? It's a serious, serious question. Ultimately, I think the people of Bosnia have to decide that. How important is their army to them, and what size that army ought to be. It should not be something decided by a bunch of internationals, I can tell you that. The stakes are too high.
It is hard to understand at this point two armies whose idea was initially to leave those two, or rather three armies in Bosnia.
Well, no one desired to have three armies in Bosnia. So there are several things at play here. First of all is the fundamental right of the Bosniaks to defend themselves. It wasn't a fair fight. They needed to be able to defend themselves. But secondly, it was not possible in the Dayton process to negotiate away the military forces. First of all, the Bosniak side would not have agreed to that. I mean, the train and equip program was a condition for their signature at Dayton. And likewise, you would not have the other parties simply disarm either. And so it was not possible at Dayton to reach an agreement in which there would be no arms in Bosnia.
What's that turning point for Izetbegovic, for instance? He asked Perry precisely to say yes to that program, and then probably he was more convinced that you're going to stand and help Bosniaks to arm themselves. Was that a key moment over there, or one of the important moments?
Sure it was. President Izetbegovic has said it to me that it was. It was fundamental to their agreement, to their signing of the agreement.
You were talking about money, Ambassador. You didn't have enough money to run this program. At the beginning, you were talking about $2 million and $1 million, and then you settled with $400 million, and it was 100 American help weapons. And is it enough to build something from the zero, from the ground zero, to be comparable to Zagreb's forces and Belgrade's forces?
We never tried to be comparable to all of the forces that Belgrade had under its control, or all the forces that Zagreb had under its control. What we did try to create was an armed force that was capable of defending the population against basically the things that happened during the war. That is, Republika Srpska reinforced from Belgrade. I think how much defense is enough? I don't know the answer to that. No one does. Some people think there ought to be a lot more. Some people think there's too much. I'm comfortable that the forces that are in the Federation today are capable of defending the population. I think we are accomplishing the goal, and I say "are" because it's not finished yet, but we're getting the job done, and I'm comfortable with where we are.
You had invested so much time, energy, and resources in the former Yugoslavia over the past 10 years. American troops have been in Macedonia since '93, in Bosnia since '95, and now they're in Kosovo. And still skeptics would say that you have so little in hand to prove that you have made real progress towards democracy. Let's start with Bosnia. Some critics say if Bosnia is success, then it is success of a peculiar kind. How would you assess that?
It depends on what your criteria are. Bosnia was at war. It was a fractured society. It was not making any progress toward statehood, although it had been recognized as an independent state. A lot of that's changed. I mean, it is not at war. We have created, I think, a reasonable military balance there. Lots of institutions have changed. A lot of refugees have gone home, but not nearly enough. Much of the economy has been restored, not nearly enough. So Bosnia is a work in progress, a long way to go. And I think there are a couple of tests coming up. One of them is how the economy is restructured, and that is something that is dragged on way too long. There needs to be a significant restructuring of the economy. If you look around Sarajevo today, you don't see very much foreign investment. There are reasons for that. There's not a banking system. The private property has not been adequate, has not been privatized. Property has not been privatized. You don't yet have a fully independent media. You have too much control of economic resources by political parties in both entities. And so there needs to be a major restructuring of the economy. I think in the year 2000, you can see the United States push hard in that area.
In your own words, with the implementation of the Dayton Accords, we are 4 years late. This was your assessment in Dayton a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you're not satisfied, even
Absolutely
though you are
not.
you have that, let's say, sweet talk that you are doing well in Bosnia. Let's start with 3 things. Your goal was united country.
Mm-hmm.
That means that entities are not stronger than Bosnia, which is not the case over there. Secondly, your choice was multi-ethnic society, to restore multi-ethnic society, and refugees are not returning home. And thirdly, talking about reconciliation, the most wanted, Karadzic and Mladic, and plus Milosevic are at large. So what is your, what would you say, what makes your glass half full rather than half empty, besides the fact that you stopped the war?
Well, and
give some
Vera, I
credit
could
to-
spend a lot of time talking about what needs to be done, and I'll point out some things. But I don't want to just totally overemphasize that, because a lot has been done. Let me start with the last point. General Galic is in The Hague. General Galic commanded the Romagna Corps. He shelled Sarajevo from 92 to 95. The fact that we have, the British have picked this guy up and hauled him to The Hague is a good thing. Now, we don't have them all, but we have grabbed up a lot more of them than we...
You said British. How about French forces doing anything? I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm talking about Galic.
Okay.
He happened to have been
In the British sector.
in the British sector, and they have picked him up and done a great job of taking a significant indicted person indicted for war crimes and gotten him to The Hague. A number of others have been picked up as well. So it's not over.
It's not, because Big Fish is still poisoning atmosphere in Republika Srpska,
Big Fish.
helping those who think that they can get away with the crime to think that they can stay in charge. For instance, Population is not, of course, on the list, but he, international community wanted him to go away, but he's still there.
He's not president.
Who is in charge in Republika Srpska?
Well,
Who? Dodik? What do you think about Dodik?
what do I think about Dodik?
Milorad Dodik,
Yeah,
Prime
sure.
Minister. Is he your #1 guy in Republika Srpska?
He has been more pro-Dayton than any other politician in the Republika Srpska, and therefore we support him.
What is his practical achievement? He proved that he is for Dayton on what account? Return of refugees?
Well, what would you suggest as an alternative? There are many politicians in Bosnia who haven't done all the things that they need to do. So, a lot of them in the Republika Srpska, many of them in the Federation. Mr. Dodik has been more pro-Dayton, I say again, than any other politician in the Republika Srpska. And has he done everything that needs to be done? No, but he's not alone in that regard. And quite frankly, I think he shows promise, and we'll continue to stay by him as long as he continues to support the Dayton process.
He has supported the New York Declaration. At that time, months ago, he said that he would allow refugees to go back to Banja Luka. And you were proud to say that in Dayton, that Milorad Dodik promised and everything. In a certain manner, what kind of things will you watching closely in the coming months regarding the New York Declaration? They didn't report anything from Bosnia as part of the New York Declaration demands. They didn't do passports, they didn't do border service, they didn't do that common secretariat. What is the situation regarding the New York Declaration?
Envera didn't come over with the details on exactly where we are on the New York Declaration, but it was these are senior political figures in Bosnia who sat before the Security Council of the United Nations and committed to the New York Declaration. Now, we expect them to fulfill those obligations. Where are they now exactly? I can't tell you, but that is part of the evaluation process, and we will be judging the performance of these particular individuals on the basis of fulfilling their commitments. I mean, they did this in front of the entire world at the UN. That's a significant step. we expect them to follow through on it.
They signed Dayton Accord. They signed Dayton Peace Agreement before entire world, but we didn't have much improvement.
Well, you know, you can take an absolute...
We are talking about promises. Do you have anything to push them? Do you have any leverage to do something if they are not willing to cooperate?
You can take an absolutist view that everything must be done immediately on a time schedule, but that's unrealistic. This is a political process of implementation, and everything won't go according to the schedule. But at the end of the day, as things progress, the question is, did people do everything that they possibly could to get this done? And you make judgments on the people and the parties and the groups on where we are according to their commitments and their ability to implement them.
Who and when is going to arrest Karadzic? This is a simple question.
I can't answer that. No one can.
What is going to happen to Milosevic? Is he still somehow the most important over there? Recently at the UN, they couldn't have a resolution about former Yugoslavia because some European leaders probably still count on Milosevic. Maybe this is not something I can prove to you, but somehow Europeans are not willing to push hard Belgrade, for instance, to apply again to membership to the United Nations. It is not the only way that people can see that Milosevic is still a figure in Belgrade. So who is responsible to get Milosevic if not Karadzic?
Well, I think you're being, again, a little bit hard on the international community. First of all, Milosevic has been indicted for war crimes. Secondly, you don't see the stream of international figures going to Belgrade that you saw from '91 to this year. Third, the sanctions fully supported by the European Union on Milosevic are extreme. NATO committed military forces in a 78-day bombing campaign against the army of Serbia. And so I think the international community has taken pretty harsh action against Milosevic and his cronies. Exactly when he will turn up in The Hague, I can't tell you that any more than I can about Karadzic. But that's the intention, that's the policy of the United States, and that's what we intend to try to do.
We'll talk more about international community because we're focused on the Bosnians and Bosnia. But at the same talking, I'd like to ask you, with regard to the leadership in the Balkans, you said about Milosevic, and probably you're not going to say more, so I wouldn't ask. Tudjman is not on the scene, but his ghost is, and in Sarajevo is Izetbegovic as the only active member of the original Dayton framework. Could you go down and on this short list and give us your impression of each of these figures? You've dealt with them for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, President Tudjman was, I'm sure, going to be a national hero in Croatian history because he was the leader of Croatia at the creation of the country. Did he do everything that he could have done in the Dayton process? I don't think so. But we'll, again, let history be the judge of that. We are concerned about Croatian political engagement in Bosnia. The upcoming elections are a particular concern, and that some of those figures who the High Representative had removed from political office in Bosnia, from political office in Bosnia, have now appeared on the ballot for the Sabor in Zagreb. This is obviously an affront to the authority of the High Representative, and it's a very dangerous political game that someone is playing here. We're looking at that. We're seriously concerned about it, and we will deal with it.
Punitive measures?
I won't get into the details of that, but this is a serious political step that someone has taken, and it reflects on the HDZ and whether or not the HDZ has any hope of supporting the Dayton process. This kind of confrontational attitude with the High Representative in Bosnia does not indicate that they're willing to support the Dayton process, and it's a serious matter.
Is it fair to say that it is a certain setback in the relationship Washington-Zagreb? Zagreb was your ally.
We're working with Mr. Petric, Ambassador Petric, on the situation in Bosnia and these elections, and this will develop over the next several days.
There is one thing I can't help asking. Could Bosniaks have done better all the way in Dayton, and then afterwards, at that point, you should say something about Izetbegovic? And what would have happened if the Serbs were defeated is a second question. And finally, would Croats have gone crazy if they captured Banja Luka, as former American ambassador in Zagreb, Galbraith, was afraid of? So maybe let's start with the Izetbegovic and with the questions: could Bosniaks have done better, meaning Bosnian Muslims?
Well, you always look at an agreement. There's no agreement that I know of, a negotiated agreement, when the parties from the table walk away from the table wondering whether or not they could have done better. Dayton was an exhausting process, and it had at stake the futures of the peoples of Bosnia represented by those leaders there. I think it took all the energy and emotion that the people who were there could muster to get that job done. And so I wouldn't second guess this. I don't think it's productive to look back and to say what could have been done. I can just tell you from personal experience, it took all the energy that we had to get what we got. And I don't think that any of the leaders, had we stayed longer, we wouldn't have made the agreement that much better. So I think it came out about right, and that's all you can do, and you take what you've got and move on.
But you were not happy with the fact that Serbs could be defeated in Bosnia. You stopped the offensive in Bosnia.
We don't know that for sure. The Bosnian Croat, or the Croatian offensive in Bosnia, was on the outside of Banja Luka. It had created a huge number of additional refugees. These happened to be Serb. Whether or not Serbia would have intervened with more military forces, and when, that was an uncertainty. Was it a good idea to create another 250,000 refugees? It's all, again, looking at this in hindsight. But that is a real question, whether or not that offensive should have gone and run its course. I was involved in the decision not to do that, and you know, we'll be asking ourselves whether we did the right thing. But you know, that we have what we have, and so we work with that.
Did you trick President Izetbegovic at that time with the false informations in a way, and he decided to give in? Because somehow I understood that Holbrooke fed Izetbegovic with the wrong informations about war on the ground.
I think this was primarily a Croatian offensive. I mean, there were a number of Bosniak units involved in it, and there were, and I don't want it to belittle the role of the Bosniaks in this particular offensive, but largely it was a Croatian military offensive that started in the Krajina and just kept rolling. I don't know. I don't think there was any trickery here. I think President Izetbegovic probably had a very good idea of what the situation was.
You're dealing with the President Mr. Izetbegovic nowadays. You're going to go to Sarajevo and you're going to meet him. Do you have any particular reason to be satisfied or dissatisfied with his performance, let's say?
Well, President Izetbegovic is a heroic leader of his people and is recognized as that. And we have worked with him for a number of years, and we've worked with him successfully. Last year we had the largest number of refugee returns since the Dayton Agreement. Most of them came back to the Federation areas. Quite a number of them came back to Sarajevo. And so President Izetbegovic has worked with us successfully on many, many things. And again, Envera, I don't want to dwell on negatives because there have been an awful lot of positive things. Are there more things that could be done, should be done? Sure. As I mentioned earlier, the economy is extremely important. And we will hope to work with President Izetbegovic and his government over the next several months to straighten out the economy in Bosnia. We will also be working with the RS as well.
Some people still believe that Americans are holding Bosnia on the back burner, and some think that Bosnia is a dead story. Is it fair to say that Bosnia is not on spotlight, and some people think that Bosnia is already forgotten? How do you feel?
Well, Bosnia is not forgotten. Bosnia is important to the legacy of President Clinton. It's important to Secretary Albright. Both of them are engaged in Bosnian policy. I mean, President Clinton was recently in Sarajevo, but it's not the only thing that the United States has to deal with. I mean, we have had a war in Kosovo. There are other issues around the world that grab our attention. And so Bosnia is not forgotten about. We're heavily committed to it. We will continue to be committed to it. The Secretary and the President are involved in it every day, but it is one of many things that the United States must deal with.
Kosovo was a new kind of war, one fought for humanitarian purposes, let's say, and would you please compare Kosovo to Bosnia, being late in Bosnia and being engaged in Kosovo, how that is important, could be important for Clinton's legacy or for Clinton doctrine?
I don't know that there is a Clinton doctrine, but I know that President Clinton has been committed to stability in the Balkans. Kosovo has always been a concern. It was a concern of the Bush administration in the Christmas warning in 1992, and it was a subject of a commitment of NATO military forces in which the United States played a large role, and therefore a significant issue because we don't commit our forces lightly to conflict. It is, in many ways, there are many similarities. Milosevic, the VJ involvement, ethnic cleansing as a concept, but also there are many, many, many differences between the situation in Kosovo and the situation in Bosnia. Bosnia, in some ways, is a much more complex situation. It's larger. It has two entities. It has three constituent peoples. It has it is recognized as a government, yet it doesn't have the state level institutions that it needs to have. So in a lot of ways, it's more complex, but it has the same kind of problems as Kosovo in other ways. For example, Kosovo, like Bosnia, is coming down from a long, not too long, but a history of communism, and therefore institutions are not structured right. The economy is not correct. The media is not free and independent. And so there's a big challenge in the international community in fixing some of these things that are similar to what's happened in Bosnia.
You mentioned free media often, and I would like to ask you about Bosnia. The situation for journalists over there is really grim. They're killing journalists, don't they? Or they tried, at least. The truth is, it was in Republika Srpska, but still, for me, it's really scary, even though it seems so far. What would be your best assessment? How people can have clear picture what is happening if journalists are afraid to write what they see?
Right. Well, first of all, journalism is a risky business. It's not a profession without both personal and political risk. I mean, we've had journalists in the United States killed because people didn't like what they've written or said in the media. I think the key to the media reform is, again, getting the media funded outside of political structures. That's, to me, fundamental. Get the media funded through independent means and away from the party. Now, that's easier said than done, because that means that you have to have an economy that's supportive, that has the resources that can support independent media. Then you need the legal protection of journalists, so that they can't be intimidated and influenced, and that they have legal recourse against those who seek to intimidate them. And then there's, of course, criminal penalties for anybody that tries to harm them. But there's no way that you can guarantee that there won't be any threat to journalists, because there are very high stakes involved in laying out the truth to the public. That's a very honorable thing to do, by the way.
I just thought that it is risky, but here in the States they protected journalists under Constitution in a certain way. They have obligations, of course, at the same time. But thinking about Bosnia, in a way, you mentioned international community, and media reform is important. Of course, it may sound harsh when I said that international community did or didn't do this. But let me ask you this. We have a lot of international officials over there in Bosnia. They or you spend a lot of money on us, observing us. At the same time, we don't have money. We are in charge of running Bosnia. We are under scrutiny, but we don't have means to do a job. So you're there reporting and leaving. I mean, is it fair to say this way? And at the end, you are reporting that you spend on us like $100 million for media reform, and still salary for certain journalists is like $200 or $300 Deutschmarks. Is it fair then to say that you observed Bosnia media reform?
Well, I think it's too simple to say that we just got in there and observed and make a comment and so forth. Hopefully the international community's done a little more than that. Most of them have gone in, not just in media, but in order to help in one way or another, either through training, advising, trying to set up programs. I can't speak to salaries. I mean, there's a difference between salaries on the international scale, and probably not fair, and but that's not something I can fix. But a lot of resources have been invested in Bosnia. The question is, have the lessons that people have tried to pass on stuck, and has the training taken hold, and are the changes going to be accepted? In some cases, what all the international community can do is just say, here's what we think, and then it's up to you to accept that or to mold that in a way that's unique to your particular society and culture. It's going to take a long time to sort out whether that's happened or not. But I can say that you can't expect the same level of resources over the long term. I mean, there was an immediate rush into Bosnia after Dayton to get the military there, and you had at one point 60,000 NATO soldiers and NATO and Allied soldiers in Bosnia. That's going to be down to somewhere around 30,000 next year. I think you will see a similar reduction in other programs, and so there's a limit, and there are other issues to how far the international community can and will go here. And at some point in time, this needs to stand on its own.
I believe, Ambassador, that the Bosnians are grateful, and this criticism is rather on the scale that international community is measuring us, but they don't have anyone to who is going to say that international community failed. They can be there and they can try, and they can leave. So who is the one who is going to assess what international community has been doing for 4 years? Or
Well,
who is the boss?
having worked on this for a number of years now, I can tell you that there are no shortage of critics. There are lots of people who will be more than happy to stand off on the sidelines and critique everything that's been done, and talk about how this could have been done better or that could have been done better. And in some cases I can accept that. In some cases not so well, because the question is, where were you when things were happening? So we'll see. But I don't think there's going to be any shortage of people who are willing to critique how well the United States, the UN, NATO, and others have done there. Those books will be written for years to come. Maybe you'll write one.
You've been for 7 years in charge of Bosnia. Somehow you mentioned Bosnian nobility. You've been, in a way, seduced with simple people, with my ordinary people, let's say. What is the best thing you remember from Dayton and from Bosnia, let's say, talking about negotiations and after that implementation? What amazes you the most?
The Dayton process itself was an unbelievable experience, because you looked around and here were normal people, and I would put myself in that category, who had been given this awful responsibility of trying to end this war in a way that was fair and it would provide some future hope for the people there. So what struck me about that, because I'm not a professional diplomat, was just the awesome responsibility of that whole Dayton process, and the decisions that the men and women who were there had to make, and how that was going to affect the future of their people. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's all about the people in this place. It's not about Holbrook or Pardew and Izetbegovic and Tudjman and Milosevic. It's about the future and the quality of life for the population.
But people are creating. Holbrook was the one who created certain environment, let's say, who pushed here and there, pull and switch or whatever. You helped a lot. You are a practical optimist, and they say that you were force behind the scene. Still, I would like to ask you at the end, are you satisfied what you have been doing all the way? You stayed with Bosnia for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You're a professional soldier. It's hard to have words from you. It is getting hard not to be rude, you know, pushing you to say something more. But still, don't leave us short with the knowing. Is there any secret about Bosnia 10 years from now, let's say?
Well, I hope Bosnia 10 years from now is standing on its own feet. I don't know if that's going to be true or not, but we'll see. I mean, that's what I hope happens, is that Bosnia is living peacefully with its neighbors, looking to the future in some kind of democratic structure that's acceptable to the people there. That may be a lofty goal. I don't know. It takes time. These things take time.
Whom you're counting on in Bosnia? Do people in Bosnia know that they can change leadership, or you believe that they still are not aware of their power regarding voting ballot?
One of the things that's puzzled me through all of this is the willingness of some of the population, in some cases, to follow weak or self-promoting leadership. I think part of that is a carryover from the old system. I think people do have to understand that they do have choices. I think the best the international community can do over the next few months and years is to give people choice, and let somebody walk into a voting booth and make a decision as to whether this person or that person reflects their real interest. You've got elections coming up in Bosnia, and there's some elections in January, and then I think there are elections later in April. Those are very important elections. And what we should do is try to present a series of choices. And then people need to look at those individuals who are running for those office and hold them accountable by walking in there and pulling a lever or putting an X in a square, indicating that this is the person that you expect to support their interests. And if they do that, and if they're given choices, I think the people, I have confidence in the population. I think the population do the right thing.
Ambassador, whenever I talk to people who created history of my country in a way, I always think that I would be wiser afterwards and have that secret word or secret knowledge what was happening in Dayton and what is going to happen. It is hard to expect, but is there anything I didn't ask and you would like to say and help to satisfy my curiosity and curiosity of my people?
Well, I think you're asking too much if you're looking for a simple solution here. This was very difficult. It was Bosnia, in a sense, is a victim of the conditions that existed at the end of the 20th century. I mean, communism the wall came crashing down. Milosevic was in power. Nationalist leaders used the passions of nationalism to support themselves and created this horrible war that lasted for too long. And now we've been, since '96, almost 4 years, well, let's see, 4 years, almost exactly, working on a solution to that. We've just now crossed the line in which the period of peace is longer than the period of war. A lot of progress has been made. There's no simple solution here. I think in some ways there's a generational issue. New leaders are going to emerge. Maybe you're one of them, you know.
I would like to emphasize that communism thing. Actually, we, at the end of the bloody 20th century, somehow we don't have Nazism and communism, but we got nationalism and then globalism. We have all of these isms, and my country obviously is in the middle of everything. Since World War I and Gavrilo Princip, Sarajevo is on the spot, unfortunately, mostly not with the good news from over there. Do you believe in Olympic Games in Sarajevo, like Senator Biden said? See you in Sarajevo. Do you believe that Sarajevo one day is going to be the brightest, the most open city? Do you believe, if you're from Belgrade, that you can come to Sarajevo? Because some people fear that they can't go to Sarajevo if they're Serbs. My feeling is totally different. So what would be your feeling about, let's say, Sarajevo and Bosnia in future, at that sense?
Well, you describe me as a practical optimist. I'd like to think of myself that way. I think there is potential that Sarajevo will be an open city. I certainly believe that Serbs can return to Sarajevo, and a lot of them have, as a matter of fact. And there were a lot of Serbs who stayed in Sarajevo throughout the war. And so I think if we have a positive change of government in Belgrade, that can speed up this process. I'm also hopeful that the Serbian people will do the right thing and remove Milosevic and replace him with more progressive, democratically oriented leadership that can get this whole region back to being normal. And what does normal mean? It means it's part of the European community. It has a democratic government. People are looking out for their jobs and their economic benefit. They want to get a good education for their kids, and they're not worried about past history and so forth. That may be hard to do, but I think it's possible.
So no conspiracy theory behind the war in Bosnia? Or
conspiracy theory? Nah. You know, I've said before that the conspiracy theory concept was invented in this area. Everybody seems to have a conspiracy theory. Most of the time when people talk about conspiracy theories, I discount it out of hand because I find out most of the time it's nonsense. You got to just deal with the real facts as they are and not look
for hidden meaning.
I would like to ask more, but obviously this is the end of this conversation, at least for today. I'm more than grateful for this opportunity, and I believe that people in Bosnia appreciate having you again. And happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Great.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Bye.